My name is Bahia Simons Lane. I'm the executive director of the US Jet Program Alumni Association, US Jet AA. I was a jet myself in Gunma Prefecture from 2005 to 2007, which was quite a while ago, but with all the jet departures, I definitely remember what it was like being in your shoes. So I hope we can ease your minds and get you ready to go. US Jet AA, if you're not familiar with us, we're a nonprofit organization that exists to further US-Japan relations by supporting the network of jet alumni. So as you are accepted jets, we welcome you into our fold, and I hope that you will become a member of US Jet AA and take advantage of our resources, especially once you come back. I also think it's very important to thank our sponsors for this webinar. It is partially supported by Claire, which is one of the organizations that runs the JET program. We are funded by Claire Tokyo, and the Japan Foundation CGP, another one of our funders. So thank you very much for supporting this webinar so that we're able to offer it to you. So before we begin, I know a lot of you had a chance to submit questions during registration. We got a lot of kind of general JET questions about expectations and things that are going to happen. Many of those are going to be answered by your JET coordinators and the JET Alumni Associations when you do your pre-departure orientation. So we're not going to be focusing too much on that as you prepare to leave. However, I'm very excited to let you know that we just launched a virtual pre-departure orientation, which is set up as a Google Classroom. So if you would like access to that, please fill out the survey. I'll put in the chat as soon as I finish with the introductions, and we can get you access to that. This resource, we just launched. You're the first people I've told about it outside of the JET coordinators and the JET alumni associations who helped us build it. But it is built in collaboration with 7 different JET alumni chapters who have been doing virtual pre-departure resources for their outgoing jets. It's pretty simple. It's set up like an FAQ, and I hope that it will help you. Please note that especially with COVID and just general, every situation is different. We are volunteers. Well, the people contributing content are alumni volunteers, so it may not be 100% accurate, and it does not represent the views of the JET program itself, Claire, MOFA, or any of the other organizations. And if you have any specific questions, especially about departure, please consult with your JET program coordinator, as they are the ones who has all the most accurate information. For those of you who are watching this as a recording, if you would like access to that resource, please email us at contact@usjetaa.org. All right, enough of that. Thank you all for being here. I would like to introduce our presenter today, Kristy Ishii. She was coincidentally also a jet in Gunma, like I was, and she was a jet there from 2016 to 2018. And now she works as a coach and is the founder of her own company. So she is going to help us mentally prepare to depart on the JET program. And I'm about to turn it over to her. In the meantime, if you have any questions that come up through the course of the presentation, please use the Q&A feature to ask them. You can ask them in the chat too, but sometimes we miss those. So click on Q&A. If depending on how you're joining, it's usually at the bottom of your screen, or you can, or from the app on your phone, you should be able to find it, and you can put in a question that we will be able to decide which ones we're going to answer at the end. It helps us keep it organized. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kristy.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'm really excited and super stoked to share kind of my thoughts and experiences. And as Bahia mentioned earlier, this is completely entirely my personal experience and opinions. Nothing is representative of even like US Jet AA or Claire or any other of the sponsoring organizations. So please make sure you're aware of that when you do hear the things that I will say. And also, even though this is titled, mentally gearing up for jets, I do want to make it very clear that this has nothing to do with actual therapy. This is not a therapy session in any way. This is really just tips and thoughts that I feel like are really important to touch on. And I feel like I didn't get this kind of orientation portion of things when I left. And so I just wanted to share some things that I felt might have been left out. And hopefully I'll share with you like the purpose of this basically, but I'm gonna share with you a PDF version of this. So I know this isn't gonna look entirely, is this big enough? Can you all see this okay? Just like maybe drop in the chat, like if you can see. I know there's a thumbnail. Yes, okay, awesome. I'm just doing this so I can like read your comments while we are talking as well. Thank you so much. And let's see. Okay, so a little bit about me before I jump into telling you what the purpose of this is. So my name's Kristy Ishii and I'm from Central California in Salinas. I did a few things at UCLA as a student working at the UCLA Extension Center and did the JET program right after college, so 2016 to 2018. And then I actually stayed in Japan and worked for 2 years as a full cycle recruitment agency recruiter, basically in Tokyo in the international district in Azabu for 2 years. And then I came back to the US and went through about eight-ish months of trying to figure out my next move and decided to start my own business. And I'm currently also in this coaching mastery program in Santa Monica. It's an online 1-year course for coaches, and it is like informed by psychotherapy. And I've gone through a lot of modules and things that are related to like mental health a little bit, and just also related to like identity, things that will come up during your time in JET, things like positive projections, negative projections, things like that. So a little bit of this presentation might tap into some of that. And right now what I do is I work with expats who live in the US. So that could be Japanese people or other type of expats, and then expats like US expats or other Westerners living in Japan. And I do career transition coaching for them. So that gives you a little bit of a background on me. And the purpose of this webinar are these 3 things. And so for you to feel more prepared, for you to feel less anxious, if you're anxious, if you're not, that's okay too. And for you to feel better equipped mentally and emotionally for experiencing the unexpected. I remember when I went to a lot of these orientations, people always told me what I was going to experience. So my goal isn't necessarily to tell you all of that, because every person kind of goes through things differently. And even if you know what to expect, it still doesn't really prepare you for the emotions that you're going to go through, depending on, you know, the school you're at, the city that you're living in, and the people that are surrounding you. So as much as this is advice, at the end of the day, I just hope that you can get your questions out that you have in the Q&A, that you have a few more answers when you leave than when you came, and that you just kind of feel a little bit more confident that you're going to be fine no matter what happens when you go to Japan, because it's really soon for some of you. I know some of you joining today are actually leaving in a couple days. I think that might be the NorCal group. Anyways, I'm really excited for you. But I'm going to share with you now a little bit about where I was at, like language wise, and also like what kind of experiences I had with Japan and going there, before I jump into some of these thoughts that I have. So before even becoming an ALT, I had been to Japan 3 times. One of them was for the Kakehashi project. I'm not sure if any of you have gone through that program before. Sometimes they link up with universities in the US, and they do just like short-term 2-week programs. And that was pretty fun. I joined like the JSA at UCLA for a little bit to practice some of the Japanese. I took a couple classes there during my junior and senior year, but it was like the Genki books and it wasn't like a lot of Japanese. I took to level 5, which sounds like it's intermediate, but there was a gap of like a year between that class and when I actually went to Japan. So I lost most of it. So that didn't really help, but I thought I was ready for the language. And I also did a 5-week internship in Japan through GPI US. Some of you might have done that. I know a lot of people who've done that in the past ended up going to JET because it was a similar feel, but very different, because this was 5 weeks, 5 different schools, and just like an English camp. So this is all just to tell you that when I was on my way to Japan, I was really excited, as you should be. But I a little bit overestimated how far my Japanese is going to take me when I first got there. And for some of you, when you get to Japan, everything's going to be taken care of for you. You won't have to fill out forms, maybe. But I'm just going to give you the tips that I think will help like ease your mind, so that when you do get there, if you don't have like the 200% support that some jets do get, you'll still be able to function. You'll get through the small like baby step things on your own, whether or not somebody's there to take care of that for you. So as a jet, you are definitely way more taken care of than any other English teacher that goes to Japan, versus any other program. Jet takes care of you the most, I would say. But even still within that, like, as you know, ESID, every situation is different, and sometimes you do have to do things on your own. And that's kind of what my experience is like, a little bit more. And also, this webinar is going to be kind of short. But if you're interested in kind of reading into more of a detailed experience, I had a blog during the first, like, leading up to the departure, so a few weeks before, and also about 6 months into the jet experience, because I didn't really have anyone to share my thoughts with. So I just wrote it down. That was like kind of my outlet. If any of you journal, it's a really good way to get things out. I decided to blog to update people back home. There are lots of other blogs out there as well. But if you want, you can screenshot it, QR code it. And I also added a picture of the Kyushoku. If you're in elementary or middle school teaching, you'll get this like list of all your food. It's all in Japanese. And it can be like more or less, I feel like it's around 5,000 yen. So it's roughly like $45 US for your lunch to be provided for you every day. And you don't have to eat everything, but this was one of my favorite ones, is the curry lunch. And I just want to share that with you because you'll find that kind of stuff in the blog as well. Okay, so I'm just gonna throw up this title page here, like identity, starting from ground zero. And I just wanna ask the people in this call, if you have access to a computer, yeah, if you're high school ALT, you won't get school lunch, yeah. So just middle school and elementary school get school lunch. I'm really curious, for some of you, I know some of you might be just graduating or have graduated and have to wait to go on this, to go on to JET. Some of you might be coming from a job and then going into JET after, maybe 2, 3, 4, or 5 years working as a professional in the US. So I just want to ask kind of like a really basic question. Like, how would you say, how would you say you identify in the US? And that's kind of a broad question. So as far as, if somebody were to ask you in Japan when you get there, somebody's gonna say like, oh, where are you from? What would you tell them? Like, I mean, you could say you're from America, but a lot of, or Canada, French Canadian. I'm just curious if y'all have, oh wow, okay. There are people from all over the place. So French Canadian, Newfoundlander, Japanese American, Bengali American, same for Hawaii, okay. Awesome. American born Chinese. Okay, I love it. Okay, yeah, keep sharing kind of how you would identify. I'm gonna explain like 2 things here. So the reason why this is starting from ground zero is because really you're going to be building up who you are and how people view you from ground zero. Like when you go to Japan, nobody, even the ALTs, right? You're all gonna be strangers. Your BOE are gonna be strangers. Your students, your teachers, no one's gonna know who you are. So try to imagine like going to Japan and you have a blank canvas. None of the things you accomplished in the past are going to matter. Cultural context plays into this. So even the way that you identify in the US or wherever you live in Canada and any other country, that's not necessarily going to translate when you speak to someone in Japan. You're also going to, you know, when people ask you like, well, what do you do? Or what brought you to Japan? You're going to be asked a lot of questions just by nature of being like a foreign person in Japan. And so I just want you to take a moment to kind of like recognize and like appreciate, you know, the identity that you have today and before you go to Japan, and start to get comfortable with this idea that that may not be how you can present yourself right away when you get to Japan. I share this from personal experience because when I first left America, I had this idea that like my identity was like Japanese American, and you can say in Japanese, you can say Nikkei Amerikajin or something like that. I'm fourth, fifth generation, so I would like to try to say like Nikkei Amerikajin yonsei gosei, and it didn't translate in Japanese. And that's because culturally that doesn't make sense, because if I'm American, they assumed I have to be half white, or they assumed I shouldn't look Japanese if I'm American. And so this is gonna, like, your identity is going to be shifted based off of who's talking to you, what setting you're in, how you're presented to the group by whoever's introducing you. And so just start to get comfortable with this idea that your identity might be a little bit fluid when you go to Japan, and not everyone's going to receive it in the same way that you're intending to share. For some people, identity, it doesn't really, you know, bother them if people don't accept how they present themselves. And that's totally fine. You'll be rock solid when you go to Japan. On the other hand, if you're like me, who's like really proud of like my heritage and my ethnic background, and like it's a big part of me, like as a human and growing up, to go to Japan and have like my Americanness like denied by the people I was talking to, like being self-doubted or doubted by other people, like this kind of stuff, it's obviously, it depends case by case, but I just want you to know that like you have this opportunity to like recreate who you are when you go to Japan, and just know that you are fully, you should give yourself full permission to just be you in Japan. A lot of people, when they go, they try to be as Japanese as possible to fit in, to the point where it becomes very difficult to just be yourself because you're worried about like how to do things the Japanese way, XYZ, or you have people tell you like long-term foreigners like living in Japan. Foreigners is how we call gaikokujin. I don't even like the term, but it's just after living there for so long, you start to use that word. So people, global citizens, people from other countries that are living in Japan permanently, will start to sometimes tell you like how to do things the Japanese way. I've had somebody who's not Asian tell me that I'm not doing something the Japanese way and that their way was the Japanese way. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm very, very confused. So what I really want to say is just, it's okay if your identity changes when you go to Japan. And I think for some of you it might. And the way that you present yourself, the way that you share your story, your personal story, where you're from and all of that. And it's okay if people don't understand your whole background, because sometimes there's no cultural context for it. So for example, if you're Asian American and you want to like just make it easier for them to maybe understand, so instead of saying the actual ethnicity, like Filipino American, you just say Asian American. Like Asian America doesn't exist outside of America. So that's not going to translate either. And I share this because like I hadn't lived abroad before. I'd only visited Japan. So for those of you who've lived abroad before, you already know this. But if it's your first time living abroad, just know that, yeah, there might be some questions around your identity, and it has nothing, it's not supposed to harm you, but sometimes it can feel a little bit, you know, it can be sensitive. And so just know that you're supported. And if you ever, you know, need somebody to talk to you about it, like you have me, obviously, and your friends back home, but yeah, just know you are starting from ground zero. And that can be like a really great thing too, because I know a lot of you might have been really busy when you're back home, maybe in college, you just had a really busy schedule, or you're known to be this one person for this one type of like expertise or whatnot, like the go-to person for XYZ. And now you get a fresh start. You get to really define your own life in Japan. So I think that's one of the most exciting things about going, aside from having to figure out like how to share your story. It's just you have full autonomy over what's going to happen next. So just a couple things to keep in mind as like almost like community guidelines when you do go. I find this to be very helpful when you're trying to make friends and try to like get along with other people, and not assume that everyone has these very like strong preconceptions of you just because they're Japanese and whatnot. And so this list applies to like Japanese residents, other ALTs, CIRs, PAs, prefectural assistants, and anyone else you get in touch with in Japan. But just keep in mind that people are going to have expectations and preconceptions of you based off of like where you're from, your language that you speak, or the languages that you can speak, and your appearance. And it could come from like the movies. It could come from wild things that you've never even heard of, but just know there are people that are going to have expectations of how you're supposed to act, how you're supposed to speak. And that's okay, but just know that's coming. And not everyone that you meet in Japan, wherever you go, especially in the countryside, just know that Japan is a very diverse place with very diverse opinions. And similar to like the US, you could go to one city, you go to another small city, and it could feel like very different countries. So and people have different, biases and opinions of certain types of people. So just know that it's no different in Japan. Like if you go to a big city like Kyoto or Tokyo, it's going to be a little bit more open-minded, to put it in that word. But in the countryside, there are a lot of very traditional ways of thinking. And I know when I first went to Japan, I was really jaded by the countryside because I thought, erroneously, I just assumed that Japanese people all thought a very particular way, similar to the way the people in my little city were. And I got so many of the same reactions to like the types of clothing I wore, the colors I wore, that I just thought that that's how Japanese people in general reacted, until I moved to Tokyo. And then I was like, well, this is a very different country. So if you have the chance to like travel around Japan, I do encourage that, so that you don't really paint everyone with like one singular brush, like I did. So I don't recommend thinking that way. And also, one thing that does happen a lot in the communities once you get into your job is that a lot of people tend to kind of talk about all the things that are bothering them. There's a lot of, I don't know if you've talked to some other Jets who've been on the program, but there can be an onslaught of just like complaining about their situation, the school, the teachers, and it can become a bit much. And so just know that like if somebody is sharing their grievances with you, like they're frustrated with something, you never know like what they're really going through. So try not to compare your experiences and compare like who has it worse or better, because it's really draining for the whole like ALT community. And so really just like try to be supportive of the people that are around you. I know this sounds really basic, but you're gonna see when you get there that sometimes just all these very basic principles kind of go out the door when you're in a new country. You have no idea what's going on. You can't even speak the language that the people are speaking to you, and it gets very confusing. So just a few things to keep in mind around like perceptions and conceptions or misconceptions. I know a lot of people have asked me about COVID and how the situation is in Japan. Just to get a feel for the people that are in this call, do you actually, does anyone, if it is yes, just type in yes, but do you know somebody who's living in Japan right now and who has shared with you the situation of Japan? Okay, so it looks like there's a lot of there are a lot of yeses. Great. Okay, perfect. So that's good that you have like a lens into somewhere in Japan, and if you don't, that's okay. I want to share with you 3 of the main like online links. I don't know if you already know them. You can screenshot this if you need to, but there's like when I was living there, I know I checked it sometimes. It's gotten a little bit more robust, and one of them, the Tokyo one's very confusing. But just know that they have some of these if you are a person who likes to keep track of numbers, also knowing that like sometimes it's not really tracked super accurately, obviously. But if you really want to know your prefecture, they have like nationwide numbers and stuff listed. There's also a really good IG account, like it sounds interesting. Maple Sushi is her IG account, but she's an Australian who's lived in Japan for over 10 years. And what she does, and a lot of people have shared her resources, but she'll like translate a lot of the articles into English or highlight certain things that come out in the news. So if you are living there and you want to kind of get the recent updates, I think she lives either in Tokyo or Kyoto, I forgot, but that's a really good resource as well, especially if you are just kind of curious to keep up to date with how things are going in Japan. I'm gonna go to the next slide and talk about language. There were a lot of questions that I've had about how do I prepare for the Japanese language? And honestly, just maybe if you can share this too, how do you, if any of you've taken the JLPT, I'm curious if you have, what level of Japanese do you know that you have based off that test? Or roughly about what level do you think you are? So N1 is like business level, N5 is the first level of the test. And if you don't know, oh, okay, so some of you, yeah, CIRs, you're good. N6, okay. So awesome. Just so you know, like when I went, I had taken one intensive course during the summer. It was like a 9-week class at UCLA. And then I took 2 more courses after that. Like I said, I had a gap between when I went from that to Japan. So I like didn't really remember a whole lot. Like I honestly, I could do my self-introduction. So this is also more for like ALT, CIRs, you're pretty much good to go, I'm sure. But for ALT, since language is not a requirement for our job, just know like I went in with very little Japanese. My family doesn't speak Japanese. I'm 4th, 5th generation. And so I thought I had enough Japanese to get by, but it was probably more like N5-ish level that I went into Japan with. And I ended up leaving and I passed N2 on like my 3rd year there or something. So you can learn Japanese at any age, but I just want to share these with you. This, if you want to study anything, like bare minimum, I would say you can check out this YouTube channel. It's not sponsored or anything. It's this guy who lives in the countryside in Japan. So if you are living in the countryside or anywhere, it's called Kominka Hitorigurashi or Solo Life. And basically when it was, oh, sorry, I was just reading some comments. If you watch this, it's written like in subtitles, so you have to be able to read. You can put on the English subtitles too to read at the same time, but you can get a sense for like the products that are going to be in Japan that you'll need in like the bathroom area, the kitchen area. It shows you like the life of living in Japan like really well. Plus, you have to also be able to read if you're kind of like N3. N2 level. It's really good for your reading, but also just visually so that you can make sure you know like what products are what. It's actually really helpful. I didn't have this resource before I went, but when you're going out to buy your like laundry stuff, your cleaning solutions, oh my gosh, you don't want to clean something with like some like toxic, you know, chemical, or you don't want to, I know it sounds silly, but you'd be surprised how many people buy like chemicals when they're supposed to get like dishwash soap or dish soap, and it's like, or bleach, or it's complicated because sometimes it's really confusing, especially if you don't have internet when you first get there. Sometimes that's the case, and you have to just, you know, ask people in really broken English and Japanese to figure things out. So at the very minimum, just take a look at this. There's some cooking things too if you want to, if you like cooking Japanese food. There's also the like things that you should definitely know if you don't really have a high level of Japanese or even like medium level. Know how to write your name in katakana and hiragana, but mostly katakana because that's how you're going to be writing it. And if you have like an Asian or like Japanese name, know how to write the kanji if they are using that. They didn't use it for me, but like on the official papers, but sometimes some of my friends who had Japanese last names like wrote their name in kanji. But I guess if it's your name, you should know it, or you should practice it. You don't have to know it, but they'll usually have you write either in katakana or English when you have to fill out your forms. And you know, not everyone has to fill out the forms for the water bill, the gas bill, their like apartment contract and things like that. Like sometimes the BOE does it for you, but in my case, I had to do that myself. And I just remember sitting in the non-air conditioned area of my apartment. It was the kitchen. I was like writing on the stool. So I was like on my knees, writing on a stool with the gas guy sitting like Seiza style in front of me, the BOE standing behind me. It's hot. It's like the middle of August in Tatebayashi, Gunma, which is like one of the hottest prefectures during that time. Like it was like second record breaking under Niigata. And I was dripping sweat, just trying to like not screw up my name and the address that I was living at. And I had to fill it out like 3 times on the paper. And the paper was getting wet because I was sweating. You guys, it was not fun. So I just want you to at least know how to write your name in katakana. And at the bare minimum, like your prefecture and city name, because you should know those. Just get used to seeing that, type it out somewhere on your phone, just get used to like writing it down, because it will be very helpful if you just remember that prior to having to do all that stuff. And then also like, these are the 3 apps I usually use, but other people, there are other like great translation apps and stuff. But for Iniwa, it's this like red one. I use that a lot when I'm trying to translate faster. So somebody will send you a block of Japanese text, and what you can do is like you can copy and paste that into Imiwa's analyzer, and it spits it out in furigana. So it'll come out with like the hiragana underneath, and then it will also give you the definitions, and you can practice the kanji and stuff. And Felipe shared Shirabe Jisho on iOS. So yeah, there are lots of different types. And if you have any others, feel free to post that in the chat so that other people can find an app that works for them. But these are my main 3. And also the Google Translate was really nice because at least for some of the foods at the grocery store, you're able to turn on the camera and then like get that translation. But it doesn't work for like the meats and stuff. So if you do buy chicken, one time I bought the cartilage chicken on accident. Like I couldn't read the entire thing. It didn't look like there was cartilage in there, and I bought the wrong chicken. So just know like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But these were really helpful when I was in Japan. And while you don't need Japanese necessarily, I mean, you might be in a situation where your teachers, your JTEs don't actually speak English. And so that was the case for me. Like they spoke a little bit, but we spoke in Japanese, tried to at least. The first 6 months were really hard for me, to be honest, guys. And so there were times where like you'll be in the front of the classroom speaking English. I was in middle school. So just to context this, I was in a middle school. Not super high level English. English wasn't a big part of the curriculum. It was just like the basic bare minimums. And I just remember standing up in front of the 6th grade class, so ichinensei, and trying to speak to them in like English and do a lesson with them. They don't understand English. So here I am just trying to talk to them in English, teach them English in English, which how are you gonna, I don't know. It was just very difficult. And the teacher sat in the back of the room, kind of like laughing a little bit. Like he would chuckle. I don't know. It was just not very helpful. And he just kind of like sat there. It was really good for me because I was forced to like find different ways to connect with the kids, like through the sports that they were playing outside or through the piano room, and the musical kids, or going to the art room or the library and connecting with kids through other ways than the language at first, because that's all I could do. And so although they say you don't need Japanese, having some type of Japanese, or once you get there and just surrounding yourself in the language, that will definitely help. So aside from the apps and things like that, though, these are some tips for if you are, sorry, this is so countryside based. You'll be fine in the city usually, as far as finding people to talk to and meeting folks and things like that. But if you're in the countryside and the population is like 30,000 people, and most of the people are either high school or younger, or like parents, or 60 years or older, it's hard to find people your age other than the ALTs. So the ways that you can also practice your Japanese is to meet with like the local people, talk to strangers. I did that a lot. Obviously, be careful if you're talking to strangers and you're, especially if you're a woman, but like at the same time, Japan is very safe. So just, talking's fine usually. I didn't spend a lot of time with the local Jets. There were only 4 other people and only 3 other people who actually lived in my city. And we were all very far apart, and we only had bikes. We didn't have cars. So it was really not like other cities that I had friends in where they had like 50 Jets and they were always kind of going out, hanging out, doing a lot of socials. My city wasn't like that. So I spent a lot more time with Japanese people who I met at the local bar, or the local like restaurants, small restaurants. If any of you watch Shinya Shokudo, it's like Midnight Diner on Netflix. I would say like find your own like regular place to go. That can be like a ramen place, a local small bar, somewhere where you can chat with people and like people you can frequent and like familiar faces. That really helps you kind of also feel like you have a home in Japan, home away from home, but also it really helps with like Japanese, because you kind of answer the same questions sometimes when you're meeting new people. So your jiko shokai becomes like really good, but then also you get to learn about the people in the city. You get to know like who's related to who's connected to who, and you have to be careful because it's such a small community. So don't like, talk bad about any of your teachers or anything, because they usually will know who they are, or maybe they went to your school. The other thing you can do is like join local like sports teams, dance teams if they have them, or the gym, whatever is available for you. And that's also something that I did. I joined the men's baseball team. I kind of found them playing one day and I asked if I could join a practice. They were a bit surprised to see a girl coming up to them who looked like she was in high school and had really bad Japanese. You guys, this is like 3 months into being in Japan. I was really dying to like socialize with people, with anyone. And so I ended up buying cleats and a glove, went out to practice, and I played 9 years of softball in America competitively. So I knew I could like sort of play baseball. And then at the end of practice, they asked me if I wanted to like have a jersey, be a player. And I was like, wow, yes, I do. So that's how I joined the men's baseball team over there. And also you can take cooking classes or Japanese classes at the local community center. Usually they will have those. And so those are some ways that you can level up your Japanese once you get to Japan. Because at this point, like that's going to be the best way to learn, is when you're there in person. So I just have some photos to share with you. This is the local bars on the bottom left. The top left are some of the admin, the librarian, and the kind of groundskeeper at the school. Those were my favorite people to talk to because they also were the least busy. These are the 2 on the right are from the baseball team. The one in the middle is when we had like a Grand Prix ramen event at Tatabashi. And so Gunma-chan, which is like Gunma's prefectural mascot, and then Pon-chan were there too. Oh yeah, there are some questions. Okay, so these are just snippets of like how you can really, this is even like, I would say this is like mid-tier into the community, but I know other people who were like doing, martial arts, kyodo, let's go, the arrow, like the archery things, and like a lot more like Japanese cultural related things, like even like awaodori dancing and things like that. So depending on where you are and what's like available in your community, the possibilities are really endless. So definitely, just be adventurous if you can, and take your time. You don't have to rush it. You got a whole year, but or maybe more if you decide to stay. But so this is just a little snippet on how to like what community can look like when you go. I'm gonna take a drink of water, but I'm also gonna look at some of Kyudo. Thank you. Yeah, Sarah, thanks for that. I'm gonna look at some of these questions, but if you have any other questions, feel free to add them to the Q&A too. Okay. And okay, those are good questions. I'll get to those at the end. This is a small thing on driving. This definitely, I imagine this is going to be in your other orientations, so I won't go into it too much. But I just have to share this because I had a heck of a time trying to get a license in Japan. I went to Japan not expecting to use a car, but the winters were really cold. Like when I rode my bike to school, it was like a 20-minute bike ride, but you're sweating. I sweat a lot. So I would have like icicles on my eyelashes, and I was like, oh my God, this is too cold. I'm from California. My sweat was freezing on my eyelashes. So by the time I got to school, I was like super pink and red, and I was sweating. I had to change my shirts because it was like, you can't freeze when you're biking because it's winter, but then you're super hot inside. And anyways, so I got a car the first year because I had the international driver's permit. But I will say, technically speaking, the international driver's permit, yeah, while you can drive on it for a year, if you do get stopped by the police, technically that's like, you're only supposed to use those if you're a traveler. If you're on a permanent resident, like if you have your Zaidi card, which you're gonna have, technically it's supposed to have like an actual license. Depending on where you live, they'll be less or more strict about it. So if you want to take a gamble, obviously it's up to you. But before that permit expires, it's only a year long, get your actual license. And to do that, unless you're if you have a Hawaii, Maryland, Virginia, Washington, or Ohio license, you have to take the test. For some reason, those states have signed some treaties with Japan. So you guys are very lucky. You don't have to take the test, but it's this test that is like in a course, like a course, driving course testing. And it's like, some people take it 3 times. Oh yeah, sorry, yes. I thought a lot of people are going to be from the USA, but Canada, and I think Australia, if I'm not mistaken, anywhere where it has like a national driver's test, like it usually is, you're able to translate that to a Japanese license. But I'm sharing this because I didn't pass my test, and I tried 5 times, but by the last time I just kind of gave up because I only had half a year left. And it's booked out like 2 months in advance to get your first test, and then it's a headache. So I'm sharing this with you. If you have to drive, get a license, because it's the worst to try to do. You can only take it at the prefectural city, capital city, and I was 2 hours away from there, and it took a whole day of your nenki. So like you have to take a whole day off of work. You can only do it on a weekday, and it's only at a certain time of day for foreigners or people who aren't Japanese citizens. So I'm just sharing this because it was a really big pain point during my experience, and no one really emphasized how difficult it was when I left. So I'm sharing that with you now. So hopefully none of you have to go through that. And I guess the last thing I want to share is, yeah, it's actually a little bit of like an activity for you all. And it's a letter to self. I wrote a letter to I don't know if you've done this like when you're in middle school or elementary school, but I think at some point we've all had to write one of these. And what's really unique about being in this position that you are, you're about to go to Japan, like you have no idea. I mean, you might have an idea of what your life might be like, but really like you have no idea what's going to happen. And that's like both exciting and also maybe a little like nerve-wracking at the same time. But I want to invite you to write a letter to yourself 1 year from now. And what's included in this is obviously just put the date. It's like if you have any cards, like or blank pieces of paper that you can put in an envelope, just use that. You can also do it digitally too, but basically what's in it is the date, right? Dear, and then your own name. List off like all the feelings and emotions that you're having like prior to leaving. And then also talk about all the things you want to accomplish, all the things you want to like achieve, try, taste, whether that's, you know, passing like N1, if that's, you might want to like start a relationship in Japan. I don't know, I wanted a boyfriend. I also, if you want to travel a lot, like what prefectures have you been to by this time? Or what other countries have you traveled to in Asia? Because a lot of people travel. Everything and anything that you think you want to do, write it in there. Write it in like what type of lifestyle you want to have, or imagine yourself having in Japan. Wish yourself luck at the end, because that's just a good thing to do. Seal off the letter, tuck it away, and then don't open it until a year later. And you can put a calendar date reminder on your phone. And if you are all digital and you like don't even want to try with like an actual like letter, you can type yourself an email, set it off so that it's gonna be scheduled to send a year later. The only thing is you can still read it. So the purpose is so that you can't read it for a whole year. And what's really great about this is that you'd be surprised at how much you actually accomplish, even though you have no idea how you're gonna do it. It was really humbling, but also really exciting to read this letter. When I did find it like a year and a half later, I forgot about it. But I really encourage you to try it out, because I think you all like have gone through so much just to get to this point. And, you know, it's gonna be one of the most, I think, life-changing experiences, at least at this point in your career and your lives, just to have this chance to live in such a remote job in Japan, and really just redefine who you are, learn about a culture and a language that might not be where you grew up. And so writing this out and just proving to yourself like, dang, like I'm fine. Like I have nothing to worry about. When you read this, you'll look back a year later and be like, wow, like I actually thought I would pass N1, and like you don't, and that's totally fine too. But just, give yourself a chance. Write in your dreams and aspirations, and if it's something that you think you might enjoy, I encourage it. And you can let me know how it goes a year later. But that's all I have for today. I know there are some questions here, and so I'm going to stop sharing. Let's see. Should I go over these questions?
I'm muted. I gotcha. Thank you so much, Kristy. That was really, really interesting. We did get some questions submitted in advance. I want to go to one of those first, and then we'll go to the Q&A. But I just want to say, I love the idea of writing a letter to yourself. That's not something I did, and I wish I had done it, especially because I ended up staying in Japan for longer than a year. And I think if you write that letter to yourself and there's things you wanted to do that you didn't do, then you have another year or two or 3 or 4 to do those things. So I love that advice. So the question I wanted to get to first is imposter syndrome. Could you talk a little bit about how to handle imposter syndrome going on JET?
Okay, so like imposter, and assuming this means like becoming an English like assistant teacher, maybe without any English teaching experience, and or do you think it's a different angle?
So we don't have much more information than that, although if this person's in the chat, feel free to clarify. But
okay.
Essentially, I think this is a very new experience for a lot of people, and especially if you haven't taught before or you haven't lived abroad. I think it can be very easy to kind of question, why am I here? What am I doing?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
My school, I'm a good ALT, or that they made the right choice. So just any advice for imposter syndrome in general?
Yeah. Okay. So just like in the title of like imposter syndrome, that's assuming that you're not welcome where you're going. That's a really interesting like question, and also already kind of creates this space where you might feel like you're not really stepping into a safe space. I will tell you that when you go to your school, like every situation is different, yes, but just know that you have full autonomy over like how you show up every day. Um, you don't have to say yes to every single thing that they tell you. If you have questions, if you're not sure about something, ask. Like there's the worst thing that I would say that can contribute to this imposter syndrome is just sitting there and trying to figure out what somebody's trying to tell you in maybe broken English, or trying to figure out what they're trying to tell you in a different like cultural way, and then doing it and then getting all the backlash from like, oh, why didn't you do it this way, this way, this way? And it's like, you can do it that way and get the feedback, but always ask, yeah, always ask questions. I find that this is just something that um, it can be a little intimidating to do, to ask the questions, but really just try. I know I wrote out my questions I tried to write it out in Japanese or English if I couldn't say it well in Japanese. So that's like something you can do. Just find out how to communicate with your JTEs the best. You can ask them like, what's the best way for me to communicate with you? So that way you don't feel so much of an imposter. But at the same time, like the first full year of JET, like I know some people have their own timelines as JET, but the first 1 year, there are going to be so many things that you don't know until the next year. And so if you really want to like get over that hump of imposter syndrome, and you're in a good school and you're in a good situation and you have the luxury of time and you want to stay in Japan another year on JET, I would do a second year, because that second year really helped me figure out my place in the school. I felt like I knew everything that was going on, and you just feel like your purpose, I guess, being there is a lot more solidified rather than just haywire and like, what am I doing here type of experience. So
I agree completely, Christy. I am so glad I stayed a second year. It was a completely, I mean, it was the same school and everything, but it was kind of a completely different experience, because the first year was just figuring out how to do everything, how to teach, you know, a classroom of Japanese high school girls, and, you know, getting to know my Japanese teachers of English and the people I was working with, and getting to know my school and all that. And so by the time the second school year started, I was able to do so much more in terms of lesson planning and collaborating with the teachers, and I knew the ropes. So I always recommend people, if it's possible, obviously there are situations where it doesn't make sense, but if you can, even if you're just feeling a little under the weather in February or whenever in the middle of winter, when they ask you to recontract, it can be really worthwhile to stay at least 2 years. And we did get some clarification about this question about just feeling not prepared, teaching, language, culture, everything like that. And I just want to reassure you all that I think most people feel like that when they go on JET, that they're not quite, you can't really prepare yourself for an experience that you've never had. So, but that's totally normal, and you'll get through it. Just go into it with an open mind, and realize that JETs before you have been in that situation and gotten through it and had really great experiences, and you will too.
Yeah, and then I will say too, if there are any people who are planning on being teachers or coming back to the US to be a teacher, have their credentials already to being a teacher. I know I met people like that, and sometimes it was very helpful. Sometimes it was also very frustrating, because as an ALT, you don't always have jurisdiction over like what you're teaching and how you're teaching it. And so you can't even use the skills that you do have as a teacher, a practice teacher, like in Japan. Like sometimes you just can't even use the skills. So I felt fortunate to actually not have had any background experience teaching in an English classroom, because that meant I could just try things out and see how they went. And I didn't have like an expectation of myself, but just also like try not to buy into this idea that you're supposed to be a full-fledged teacher when you get there. People might put that on you and expect, oh, because you're a native English speaker, you're supposed to know all the grammar, you're supposed to know everything in English. They'll come to you for like ridiculous questions. And it's like, if it was switched, it wouldn't be the same. Like you can't just go to a Japanese speaker and expect them to know all the grammar, all these different things. but sometimes they will assume that about you if you're an English speaker. So be prepared for the questions, but don't feel like you have to know everything, because clearly, like, we're not teachers. At least not a lot of us are. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, and we did get some questions in advance and also in the Q&A about teaching, and we're not going to go into too much detail about that kind of nitty-gritty, but there are lots of resources with lesson plans and things like that. You should get a primer from your departure orientation that your consulate or your JET Alumni chapter does related to teaching. And then when you get there, you'll have your what is normally Tokyo orientation, but which I believe you will be doing virtually due to COVID during your quarantine. Don't ask any more questions about that, because that's all I know. Ask your JET coordinator. And then typically your prefecture will also have a like an orientation as well, which I would say normally includes some teaching resources. So we are at 9 o'clock, but Christy has a little bit of extra time to stay. So I do want to get through some of these questions. So we'll stick around for about 10 more minutes so that we can get through some of them.
Yeah.
So a great question came in, Christy, that I want to get to, which is, what are some good ways to set boundaries as an ALT without coming across rude, especially if talking to superiors?
Ooh, yeah, setting boundaries. I will say on that aspect, set them in the very beginning, the moment you, like, the first couple weeks you're there. And boundaries, one of the biggest one that comes up for me is like time boundaries. I know a lot of jets who kind of go in feeling like really awesome because everyone's asking them to do all these different things, and they feel like they're helping out a lot, but at some point it becomes ridiculous, and people just keep, because you've said yes from the beginning, like, yes, I'll do this, yes, I'll do this, they just expect you to be like that forever. Unless you set a boundary from the very beginning. And so that to make sure you don't end up in that situation, try to test out and see like how the workflow is going for you the first like month, I would say a month or 2 months, because it's going to be choppy with them coming back to school. Sometimes there are like events that are happening on and off, and your schedule sometimes like up in the air. But I would argue that like you couldn't really come off as rude unless you're flat out saying like, no, I'm not going to do this. Like, maybe just explain why you cannot do something, or why this is outside of your contract if you want to bring in the contract, because technically it's from like 8 to 4 p.m. depending on where you live. Sometimes they change up the hours actually. But technically you're contracted to only work a certain amount of hours. And if you start out working until, instead of 4:30, you work until like 6 every day, and people get used to you being there until 6, they might expect you to be there till 6 for the whole year. And then the one day you leave early, they're gonna be like, where'd you go? But you set that boundary of yourself. So it might change throughout the year too, which is fine. It's not rude to change your boundaries, but just do it from the very beginning, I think is what I would say. But do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I have known ALTs who did not have good relationships with their contracting organizations because they were perceived as rude. But I think it was not so much setting boundaries, but how you set boundaries that is really important. You know, here as Westerners, I think most of us on this call anyway, as Westerners, we're used to a more direct style of communication. And one of the first lessons I learned when I started living in Japan was that, you know, it's very important to kind of moderate your style of communication a little bit to fit in with Japanese norms. And so flat out saying, no, I won't do that, it's not in my contract, is not a great strategy. But, you know, being more like, oh, I'd really like to help, but, you know, I'm not allowed to because of my contract. There's a really good way to be like, I can't do something. You're setting a clear boundary. You have a reason. You can't argue with the contract, but you're saying it in a nice way of, yeah, I'd really like to, but I can't, I'm not able to, I'm not allowed to. Okay, great. Christy, I think this is one that you can answer. What advice would you give to someone who wants to find a job in Japan after JET?
Oh, yeah, okay. So I went in with that mindset actually. Like when I went to Japan, jet was kind of my entryway there. And so I did have this idea that I wanted to do something in Tokyo, but I didn't know what my job was going to be yet. By the time I ended jet though, my Japanese wasn't to the level that I felt comfortable applying to positions in Japanese. So that left me with either continuing English teaching or going into recruitment. And you'll notice a lot of jets kind of transition into recruitment. And then from there, they transition into something else because that is like the easiest transition. Not saying you have to do that, but that's usually like a fail-proof way if you're going to move to the city. Finding a jet through, finding a job through that avenue going into recruitment is actually kind of nice if especially you're kind of new to the corporate world. Like for me, since I came from graduating and I went to jet, I didn't really know what exactly I wanted to do. So going into recruitment opened my eyes to all the different industries like sales, marketing, IT, everything. And I got to see the salaries people were making before I decided what industry I wanted to like jump into. So but it depends. Like if recruiting life is for you, great. It happened to work out for me that way. And it was something good for somebody who wanted to be social. And like I already was president of an NPO in Tokyo by that point. So it worked well with my life schedule. But if you want to find a job in Japan, I'll say if you go into English teaching, be careful who you're talking to and if they have jets at their school, because I interviewed at this private school in Tokyo and they had 3 jets already at their school and they wanted me to like leave early and I wasn't having a very good year. I had a rough time with one of the teachers and I was like, wow, this school looks great. I went down to sign the contract in Tokyo and I had already told us never tell your people unless, okay, this is getting long. I can, if you want to message me about this later, you can. But basically, they ended up telling me at the signing, well, we don't want to jeopardize our current jet situation. So can you come back a year and a half later? We'll hold your spot. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had to go back to my BOE, tell them I'm actually not leaving, got scolded in English by the BOE, like shutjo or whatever. And I was like, you speak English? They had never spoken English before. But all of a sudden they spoke really good English. And I was like terrified, like for a second, because they were like, you're going to get blacklisted if you leave a school early and things like that. So if you're going into English teaching, make sure you finish your jet contract because it's just not a good place to be to like leave early from jet and go into English teaching where everyone knows each other. So that's the one like thing to be aware of. But Janelle, if you want, you can message me directly on LinkedIn or something, and I can share more about that. Yeah.
Thanks, Kristy. And when we follow up after this with the recording and some of the resources that were mentioned in this, we can include Kristy's LinkedIn direct link so that you can message her for any additional information. There's, I think, 2 more questions I want to get to. The next one is, what are some things that JET doesn't really hold your hand with? You know, Kristy, you mentioned earlier, and I agree with this too, JET does hold your hand and provide a lot more support than any of the other English language teaching programs that I am aware of in Japan. But what are the things that, you know, JET, that you have to do on your own that JET isn't holding your hand about?
You have to buy your groceries. You have to like, usually you have to figure out your cell phone situation unless you're your senpai or somebody senpai, whoever senpai, usually there might be one person, go-to person. The cell phone SIM card thing was kind of rough. Learning how to like live in Japan. So like your laundry, you don't usually have a dryer. So if you're not used to hanging your clothes, knowing like when to check the weather so that your clothes don't get rained on when you're gone. What else? I don't like, there's so much that you have, like, just think about if you're moving anywhere. The only thing that they take care of usually is your bank account, because that's how they're going to pay you, and your resident card, which is like this ID card to get registered at the city, and maybe insurance because it's tied up in your pension and insurance bundle with your payments. Other than that, everything else could be up to you. I've had friends who like had to even find their own living space because the previous jet stayed and like didn't want to leave. So they had to find their own new apartment. I was lucky I had a furnished apartment when I arrived and my predecessor was still there. So sometimes you overlap with people, which is a little odd, but it's also a blessing because then you can actually know how to use the things in your apartment. That's the thing they don't teach you. I didn't know how to use the sentaki, so the washer, the clothing wash thing. I did not know how to use that. It was very confusing. And how to fill up your bathtub because they have the automatic bathtub filler up things. All that stuff you can probably look online, but it's just, there's a lot that you just have to learn on your own or with people.
Yeah, and because you're connected to the JET network too, and all the prefectures have an AJET chapter who will do social events typically, and usually have an online community. Like that's a great place to ask about those things that your supervisor isn't available to help you with. And then again, I also want to just emphasize every situation is different. I don't think they're using that anymore, but it's so true. It just really depends. I was a high school ALT, so my supervisor was an English teacher at my school, and she helped me do everything. She helped me set up my bank account, helped me get my cell phone, helped me get my internet. I mean, I had to wait a month for internet back then, right? So you guys have it better, I think. I didn't have any Japanese, and so she kind of helped out with I sprained my ankle. She took me to the hospital, but it just depends on your situation. If you're at a board of education and that's your contracting organization, a lot of times you'll have one supervisor who's responsible for multiple jets. They don't have time for doing everything for all of the individuals. So it just really depends, but you do have a good network. And then there's certain things that just no one can help you with, right? Being up there in front of your students for the first time and getting used to that experience of being in the classroom. That's just something you have to try and get used to. And I remember being very nervous when that happened because I don't like public speaking, and I got used to it. It ended up being fantastic. So just stay positive, and you can do a lot yourself.
Yeah, definitely stay positive. Like I think that's the one thing too. Being from a place where it's like normally sunny, like I was coming out of Los Angeles. California has like some of the sunniest days, I think, out of the year, like the most sunny days out of the year, maybe. And going to Japan, that's a very different climate. And during the winter, it can get very like cold and dark and sometimes rainy and very windy. And it can affect your mood sometimes. I didn't know really about like that weather affecting mood experience because I wasn't from the East Coast or somewhere where we actually had weather. We didn't even have winter in California. So I would say if you ever feel like something is just too much to handle, like really talk to somebody. And they might not be in the States because by the time you end if you're from the US, sorry, that's the only time zone I know, but I know for like West Coast, when it was 4 p.m. when I left school or like 5 p.m., everyone was sleeping back home. So I didn't have anyone to like consult with if I was having a bad day or if I was frustrated, which is why I turned to like the blog writing until I had met people I could actually talk to in Japan. And so just know, like in those moments of like distress or like loneliness or a little bit sadness because of the weather, that's normal. It's okay. You're not going to be happy every single day that you're on the JET program. Maybe you will be, but just know that it's okay to have like down days, and you'll get through it. It's not going to last forever. And JET is such an incredible experience. And think about all the people that wanted to be where you are going but didn't get the chance. And if that doesn't make you rethink about how you feel in Japan, you always have the decision and autonomy for your own mental health. I know people who ended up for their own personal reasons having to leave early, and that's okay because at the end of the day you need to take care of yourself. But just know that it's definitely, if you can push through the winter months, at least for me, like if you can push through that, it's such a rewarding experience and you won't regret staying there, I don't think. So yeah, I just hope you all are like excited and feel supported. Like we're both rooting for you all. It's going to be an amazing time. You're going to learn so much about yourself. And I think also your language skills are going to improve more than you expect. And it's just going to be, I can't even describe what it's going to be like because it's going to be so much greater than anything I could even tell you. So just have a safe flight to all of you who are leaving in the next couple months, and feel free to reach out anytime. I think, yeah, we'll send out contact info after this too.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristy. Yes, I agree. It's a life-changing experience. My entire life changed after JET, or because of JET, or during JET. So you're going to have an awesome time. I'm so excited for you all. We will send out contact information and the recording probably next week for this webinar. It'll go up on our YouTube channel as well. So I'll try to get you that as soon as possible. I know we didn't get to all the questions, so if you do have a question, please do reach out to Kristy or myself with those questions, and we will answer them as we can. I'd also I know we got a lot of questions in advance and a few in the Q&A about the kind of the nitty gritty, driving, teaching, budget, that kind of thing. A lot of that will be covered as you do your pre-departure orientations through your consulates and with your Tokyo orientation and your prefectural orientation. But we also have covered a lot of that content in our new virtual pre-departure orientation resource. So I put it in the chat. Please click the link, fill out the form so that we can get you access to that in about a week or so. All right, thank you all so much. And especially thank you so much, Kristy, for joining us. It's always powerful when Gunma JET alumni get together. Of course, every JET thinks their prefecture is the best. But thank you all for being here tonight. And we wish you a great adventure on JET. Good night, everyone.
Good night.